I think that there's no one on the internet who hasn't heard about Formula One. However, few know that the company Ford played a significant role in these races. They were one of the primary and main engine suppliers for most racing cars up until 2004, almost a whole 40 years. During this time, cars equipped with these engines won a record 176 races. Also, few are aware that in 2000, Ford bought a racing team named Stewart Grand Prix and renamed it to Jaguar. Of course, the main idea behind this purchase was to make the cars of this brand more prestigious and expensive. A brilliant marketing move. Sometime later, the team was sold to Red Bull for twice the price, and Jaguar cars became the most expensive and prestigious in the world. If you've already watched the movie Ford vs. Ferrari, I can assure you that the film doesn't fully disclose the entire scope of the rivalry between Henry Ford II and Enzo Ferrari. In reality, there was much more drama than shown in the movie. The battle between them lasted several years. Overall, the Ford company, led by its founder, is the progenitor of everything that now moves on four wheels on your streets. It seems that everything Henry Ford touched was simply destined for success. However, few know the long and truly challenging journey he had to undergo to achieve such astounding success. Henry Ford is one of the most prominent figures in automobile history. He is called the father of the automotive industry. So where did it all begin? But before we begin, make sure you have subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated with future content. Henry Ford was born in 1863 in a family of simple farmers, Irish immigrants in the state of Michigan. From an early age, he helped his father on the farm. Henry received a less than ideal education at a church school. His childhood was no different from that of his peers. However, around the age of 11, one of the most significant events of his life occurred. His father gave him a gift, a pocket watch. But instead of admiring it and boasting to the other boys, the curious lad almost immediately took it apart. He was more interested in exploring the inner workings than the exterior. No one knows where this came from, but a love for mechanics and machinery was evident in the boy from a young age. Unfortunately, the environment in which he lived and his father's beliefs didn't foster this talent. His father insisted that his son continue the family tradition and become a farmer. So when Henry turned 16, filled with enthusiasm, he ran away from home and went to Detroit in search of a better life. At the time, this was the pride city of American industry. To make ends meet, he worked at a wagon manufacturing company and, during the night shift, repaired watches in a workshop. Working two jobs for a meager few dollars a month, the young man was constantly sleep-deprived. Therefore, after 4 years of this life, Henry returned home drained and defeated. His father merely grunted, suggesting he expected this outcome, and then gave him 40 acres of land, hoping the young man would forget about machines for good. Working in the fields, Henry managed to start a family. In 1887, he married a farmer's daughter, Clara Bryant, with whom he would spend his entire life. But all this time, Henry didn't feel happy. His passion was always mechanics. After long days of hard work, he would tinker with various mechanisms at night. He felt he had a different calling, that this wasn't what he wanted to do. During those sleepless nights, Ford came up with a gasoline-powered grain thresher. It was innovative. He sold the patent for this invention to Thomas Edison. With the modest sum he received from the patent sale, the man decided to try again. Henry Ford and his wife were on their way back to Detroit. By that time, his wife was already pregnant. Henry realized that his money wouldn't last long, and considering his wife's condition, he began knocking on the doors of every potential employer in search of an engineering position. Henry faced more than 10 rejections, but he didn't give up. Soon enough, fortune smiled upon him. He was offered a position as a mechanical engineer at the rapidly growing lighting company of Thomas Edison, the same company to which he had previously sold his patent. Henry was such a diligent employee that he was soon promoted to chief engineer. One might think, what more could he want? He had a well-paying job. By that time, he even managed to acquire a small house on the outskirts, a loving wife, and a son. But no. Henry, after coming home from work in his crisp white shirt, would change into a dirty work robe and spend his evenings building his own car in his garage. It took him several years, piecing together whatever materials he could find. By 1902, his creation was ready. After a successful test run that same year, Henry made a daring move. He entered a race with his homemade car, and, to the audience's applause, beat not just any competitor, but the fastest champion in America. It was an incredible success. All of America was abuzz. Everyone was curious about this young genius and what he had crafted. Fame didn't take long to find him, and soon investors approached him. Subsequently, Henry secured a sponsor and became one of the co-founders of the automobile company, Detroit Motors. A leading position and a stake in the automotive enterprise was a promising leap into the future. But soon, Henry Ford had to leave Detroit Motors. His work methods didn't sit well with the other founders. The conflict arose when Henry suggested making car production cheaper, making them affordable for the average worker. But this went against the company's policy of producing luxury vehicles for wealthy Americans. This led to the foundation of the now famous Ford Motor Company in 1903, which, as of 2023, ranks among the top 10 largest automobile manufacturers in the world. In the company's early years, Henry Ford held the position of chief engineer and owned a quarter of all company shares. 3 years later, he became its president. The first automobile plant was launched in Detroit. Initially, cars were produced exclusively to order for wealthy clients. All parts were imported, and all that was left for the workers was to assemble them into a complete quality automobile. But Henry was discontented by the fact that the car assembly took too much time and required significant effort. Thus, Ford decided to design a universal car so that anyone could assemble it within a short period. Ford decided, as he expressed later, to put the world on wheels. His idea was that a car wasn't a luxury but merely a means of transportation and should be accessible to everyone. While other manufacturers focused on uniqueness and hand assembly, making cars for the wealthy, Henry chose a different path. At the time, the idea of a car for everyone was hard for many to comprehend. It was like envisioning mass-produced airplanes today. How can that be? People wondered. How will we, the wealthy, differentiate ourselves from common folks? In 1908, the company began producing its first affordable car, the Ford Model T. Within a few years, a new Model T was being produced every 10 seconds, making it the most popular and affordable car of its kind. For example, in 1909, the Model T cost $850, but by 1913, its price had dropped to $550. By 1921, an astounding 56% of all registered cars were of this brand. The Model T didn't just break the production record, it surpassed the then leader, the Volkswagen Beetle. It was a phenomenal success. Having put the world on wheels, cars became a mass phenomenon with their own set of rules and requirements, and Henry Ford himself became the first person in the world to receive a driver's license. In 1910, the company launched another plant called Highland Park. It was there in 1913 that the world's first assembly line was introduced, which allowed the chassis assembly to take no more than 6 hours. In contrast, without it, the assembly took about 13 hours. The assembly line was continuously improved, and with it, the time to assemble cars was reduced. To have complete control over production, Henry Ford established a full and nearly closed cycle. He wasn't satisfied with already being a millionaire by that time. He reinvested all his earnings back into production, purchasing mines for ore extraction, and acquiring several factories to ensure his car production was entirely independent. At the same time, he didn't forget about the people working in his factories. His plant had the best working conditions of the time. The minimum daily wage for his workers was $5, with the average being $7. This meant that any regular employee of the company could afford a car in just 3 months. These were incredibly high wages for that era. Working for Henry Ford was considered very prestigious. For those who don't know, we still use Henry Ford's achievements and his labor organization reforms today. He was the first to give workers the right to paid vacations and a work week with a legal day off. Also, the man who came up with the idea of a day off gave additional rewards to non-smoking and non-drinking employees. By 1914, the company operated in 3 8-hour shifts, providing thousands of jobs. Priority was given to the poor and the disabled, which was very unusual at the time. Ford himself valued the work of every employee, so even a regular janitor, with enough effort, could become a workshop manager. Entire workers' villages were established near the plant, each with its own rules, laws, and atmosphere. These rules lasted until the onset of the Great Depression. People lined up to get a job at Ford's. When hiring, he only assessed one's willingness to work. It doesn't matter to me if a man is from Harvard or Sing Sing. We hire the man, not his history. Ford often said. There were no issues with staff turnover, even though discipline at the factory was strict. Time waste differs from material waste in that there can be no salvage, Ford would say, not allowing either himself or his workers to slack off. He believed that only two motivators make people work: the thirst for wages and the fear of losing them. During World War I, Ford's factories worked directly on military orders. The irony was that Henry Ford had been a staunch peace advocate his entire life, opposing any military actions and events, but fate had other plans. Besides cars, the company produced gas masks, helmets, and, by the end, light tanks, and even parts for submarines. In 1925, Ford acquired the Stout Metal Airplane Company. Soon after, the Ford Trimotor was introduced, better known as the Tin Goose, one of the most successful planes of the 1920s. In the early 1930s, Henry Ford handed over his business to his son, Edsel Ford. From a young age, the father had involved his son in the family enterprise. During this period, the company established a new brand, Mercury, which existed until 2010. During its existence, the company sold around 8 million models. Sadly, in 1943, Henry faced a challenging time. His son Edsel died of cancer, and he returned to the position of company president. Believing that paperwork slowed down car production, Ford eliminated statistics at his plant. Ford's company had no production meetings, no excess documentation, and no communication between departments. He disliked wasting time on idle talk and the appearance of work. Perhaps top managers with advanced degrees didn't understand him, since Henry had only primary education. Still, ordinary workers were drawn to him. Even as an adult making significant agreements, Henry still made mistakes. However, he didn't consider illiteracy a flaw. The flaw was the unwillingness to apply one's mind in practice. The hardest thing in the world is to think with one's own mind, to think as you deem right, not as you were taught in university. That's probably why so few people do it. In the fall of 1945, after long family discussions, his grandson Henry Ford II became the company's new president, handing over the reins on April 7, 1947, at the age of 83. The father of automobile manufacturing left this world, but his legacy didn't end there. After his death, the company continued under the leadership of his grandson. Under his management, Ford released many more car models, leaving its mark in world history. In the early 1960s, fierce rivalry began between Henry Ford II and Enzo Ferrari, which was widely discussed by the press of that era. The legendary Le Mans race became the battlefield for their fierce rivalry. The cause of this major scandal was the pride and tenacity of Henry Ford's grandson. The early 1960s were not a great time for the Ford company due to a sharp decline in sales. The only solution seemed to be a sports car. By that time, the company's motto emphasized comfort and reliability, and the slogan "Cars for Everyone" proved the concept in practice. But sooner or later, things had to change. So, in 1963, Henry Ford II was faced with a crucial mission. He was to become the owner of Enzo Ferrari's company, another prominent automaker of that era known for its sports cars. After lengthy negotiations, the day of signing the contracts arrived. Ford promised to pay over $10 million for all the company's assets. However, at the very last minute, Ferrari declined the deal over a minor clause stating that after the acquisition, Ford would be in charge of all decisions concerning Ferrari's racing team. Enzo bluntly stated that he wouldn't deal with a terrible company that produces awful cars in a horrible factory. He passionately expressed his dissatisfaction with Henry Ford II's leadership, arguing that he wasn't worthy of bearing the name of his legendary grandfather. These words deeply wounded the Ford heir, and he decided to take revenge. Henry Ford II set out to create the fastest and best sports car in the world with which he could win the 24 Hours of Le Mans race. He spared neither money nor time. This marked the beginning of the company's first racing car, the GT40. Europe's best automotive teams worked on this challenging task. Their main goal was to produce a car that could run continuously for 24 hours. After losing the races in 1964 to 1965, the task of creating such a vehicle fell to Carroll Shelby, one of Los Angeles' most famous car manufacturers, and his friend Ken Miles, an experienced racer and engineer. They rebuilt the GT40, making it more manageable. world, altering its design, modifying the body and braking system. The world then saw the GT40 MK2, a car that brought Ford victory in the 1966 French Le Mans race, opening new horizons for the company and capturing the attention of all racing enthusiasts. This legendary supercar remains one of the most sought after by collectors worldwide to this day. After this victory, Ford cars became even more successful. The company released a multitude of new car models, claiming top sales worldwide. Among the most famous were the 1961 Lincoln Continental, which became the most popular car of its time. There's also the glamorous two-seater 1955 Ford Thunderbird, not to mention the Ford Transit, the first commercial van, which emerged in 1965. The 1982 Ford Mustang GT, housing a potent 9-liter engine and boasting an incredible 157 horsepower. This might not seem like much now, but at that time, this car was Ford's most successful. The 1986 Ford Taurus saved the company from a prolonged crisis and stagnation. Thanks to this vehicle, Ford's sales began to climb once more. Every year, this model improved, and to date, over 7.5 million units have been sold. Also in that year, the company decided to acquire the British brand Aston Martin, which was later sold in 2007. And of course, there's the widely known Ford Focus, introduced in 1998, capturing the car market from its first sale. Nearly 10 million units of this model have been sold to this day. In the early 2000s, there was a change in leadership at the company. By then, engineer and businessman Alan Roger Mullally had become Ford's president, leading the firm until 2014. From October 2020, the company has been headed by American businessman Jim Farley. Yet 40% of the voting rights belong to the Ford family, who actively participate in the company's development. The chairman of the board is William Clay Ford Jr., the great-grandson of the empire's founder. In 2023, the Ford Motor Company celebrated its 120th birthday. And here I believe it's worth mentioning facts you might not even be aware of. In the early days of production, all Ford cars were only black. This was due to the fact that automotive paints of the time were not of very good quality, making them imperfect. However, black paint was superior in durability and composition. That's why Henry joked, "Any color the customer wants as long as it's black." Henry Ford also had an interesting approach to motivating workers who monitored the functioning of conveyor equipment. The thing is, they were paid to do nothing. As strange as that might sound, they had a separate room with relaxation equipment where they could lounge on a sofa and listen to the radio all day. But there was also a special counter there, crediting their hourly wage. In case of any malfunction, this counter stopped, and the specialists went to fix the issue. The faster they dealt with the breakdown, the sooner the counter resumed. As a result, the work was always done quickly, smoothly, and efficiently. And of course, all employees were motivated to ensure that nothing broke at all. Agree, it's much more efficient than paying them for repair work, losing millions in profits from halting an entire line. Henry Ford initially planned to equip his very first cars with electric engines instead of gasoline ones, but market conditions dictated their own rules. Another interesting fact is that the company's brand logo has changed a total of 8 times throughout its history. Once, an experienced car thief sent Henry Ford a thank you letter in which he sincerely admired Ford cars and promised that from that moment on, he would only steal them. Today, the company is in the top 50 largest global corporations, and its headquarters is located in the city of Dearborn, not far from the farm where its founder was born. Before the 2008 crisis, the Ford Corporation owned brands such as Jaguar, Lincoln, Land Rover, Volvo, Mercury, and Aston Martin. They also owned 33% of the shares of the Japanese brand Mazda. However, due to the crisis, all these brands were sold, leaving only Lincoln. As of 2023, Ford had 65 factories located in the USA, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Spain, China, and other countries. These factories employed up to 200,000 people worldwide. The company's revenue in 2022 amounted to $158 billion. We probably owe a lot to Henry Ford, who was the first to introduce us to the world of cars and machinery in general. The 1964 Ford Mustang is one of the most recognizable cars worldwide. This model has appeared in more than 300 films, ranging from James Bond to Fast and Furious, and more than 10 million units have been produced, a number that keeps growing every day. Confident in his own intellect, the founder of Ford Motors often disregarded the advice of many engineers and other specialists. He always had a unique and personal view of the world. As Ford liked to say, when everything seems to be going against you, remember that the airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. This son of a regular farmer managed to make history as a man who built everything from scratch with his own two hands, as a man who did not conform to stereotypes, but, on the contrary, went against them. It was Henry Ford who gave the average worker the opportunity to own a car. What is your favorite Ford car of all time? We are curious to hear your opinion in the comments. At this point, we get to the end of our video. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon and give this video a big thumbs up.